tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening. Another evening in lockdown, which means the mountains of the Yarra Ranges are very quiet. There's still a curfew in place, so very little sound from outside. Probably the loudest sound you might hear is the sound of a deer barking or the fox howling. So even though the lockdown is a sign of difficulty that humans are going through at the moment, it has its own fringe benefits in that the world is quite quiet. Less sound pollution, less carbon pollution, less coming and going, less busy, which to a certain extent can be quite helpful to us to let our mind settle down. Something maybe to appreciate as an unusual experience, but conducive to particularly to the practice of meditation. And if we do practice meditation regularly and try to practice the Buddhist teachings as a whole regularly, it's good to remind oneself of the purpose of the teachings and why we do it. I mean, most people have a vague idea. They're practicing to reduce their suffering in life and to find more peace, more happiness. Even that, just that reflection, is something to bring up regularly, because it already gives you the goal of the practice is to make this mind peaceful. Because the tendency of our mind is just to follow our moods, desires, distractions, go here, go there. And we very easily get distracted from the path of practice and lose track of what the purpose of the practice is. Even during the middle of a meditation, say earlier we were meditating this evening, you're probably familiar with the problem that you begin meditation with a good intention to practice with your usual meditation technique, perhaps, say mindfulness of breathing, if that's the way you meditate. But then halfway through the period of meditation you realize your mind has drifted off somewhere else. It's not with the feeling of the in and out breath, it's not mindful anymore. It's lost in some story or fantasy or remembering something, caught up in the memory. Or if all of that has gone quiet, then probably just becoming drowsy, dozing off. So part of our practice is to keep coming back to the beginning, re-establishing mindfulness and re-establishing our focus on the goal of the path, goal of the practice. And to come back to, developing the qualities, and you might say the skills, that will help us to complete this practice of freeing our mind from suffering. All the Buddha's teachings have one taste, that's the taste of liberation. And again, that's part of the the purpose of this practice is to liberate our mind from the causes of suffering. We don't like suffering as an experience, whether it's just minor discontent and small little things that bug us and small problems that arise in our life, or the big kinds of suffering, pain, physical pain, mental pain and anguish. We don't like it, but we have to press on, even when we are experiencing suffering, to look for and observe what the causes are. So you can't really remove suffering as an experience until you find out what the cause is and really go to the root cause of it. But the Buddha reminded us that it can be removed as an experience. The real cause of our suffering is internal. It's in our mind, our untrained mind, our unawakened mind. And so much of this practice is about learning to wake up to the truth, wake up to reality. So just like in the morning, say if you're somebody who experiences difficulty getting up in the morning, sometimes just observe what's going on in your mind at that time. You sort of have your first awareness of sound or the time or light, and your mind sort of little by little is coming out of its state of deep sleep, and it has moments of awakening and moments of clarity, and then maybe sometimes just drops straight back into sleep, sometimes through habit, sometimes through desire. Maybe you have a quick look at the clock and you say, I don't want to get up yet, and you allow your mind to drift back into sleep. Might only be occasionally that you have a clear kind of, you bounce straight out of deep sleep into a fully awakened state. Maybe if there was a loud sound or some kind of something that makes you jump, wake up with a jump, you might have that quick movement from sleep to clarity. But mostly it's a slightly slower process. You wake up and then you go back to sleep, some clarity, some fuzziness. And meditation reflects that. You're waking up to the truth, but then you go back to sleep again. You're alert, and then you go back into hibernation mode over and over again. But as you keep practicing, you may get some encouragement from the times when you push through the fuzziness or the mind that's just stuck in its mental story, creating different stories and remembering things. You cut through that and you manage to stick with your meditation object. And that sense of clarity does emerge. Because when you let go of distractions and different mind states, mental states that are rooted in unmindfulness, unawareness, rooted in greed, anger and delusion, when you cut through them, let them go, then your mind immediately brightens and gains more energy, even if only for a few moments. And this is the benefit of training the mind in mindfulness and developing states of samadhi and calmness. You develop energy, brightness, and that energy can be channeled to good cause, and particularly to understanding where suffering comes from, what its cause is. The Buddha already pointed it out. Suffering comes from ignorance, which is a cause for craving, different kinds of unskillful desires to arise, which harden into attachment and clinging, which leads on to suffering. So he's given us the framework for reflection, but these are still just the words that we remember. We can all remember the words of the Buddha, or some of them, but we don't yet understand them fully with our own mind as from our own experience. Or another teaching the Buddha gave is that all Dhamma, sabbe Dhamma anatta. All phenomena, all Dhammas, all phenomena, meaning physical phenomena, mental phenomena, are void of self, without self. that's something we can remember, and it is a very skillful teaching to bring up and remember regularly, because it starts to incline our mind towards developing that perception of non-self, or the lack of self in experience, the lack of an abiding self or a solid, firm self. And sometimes just reminding ourselves of that teaching can help put a new perspective, give us a new way of looking at our experience. All things are not self. So when you do have a state of fuzziness or sleepiness or mental proliferation based on greed or anger of some sort or another, if you do gain a bit of mindfulness, you can straight away bring up that reflection. Oh, this is not self. It's a thought, it's a mental state, it's a feeling, it's an emotion, it's a memory. Whatever your mind is locking onto, you can give it a description of what you're experiencing, but then you can say, but this is not self. Sabbe Dhamma anatta. This is without self. It's a mental state. It could be a wholesome mental state, kindness or mindfulness or wise reflection, or it can be an unwholesome mental state, greed, anger, delusion, jealousy, fear, worry. But it's without self. It's a mental state that has arisen according to different causes and conditions. It's there and then it passes away. And if you practice regularly, then and you establish that insight regularly, well, it helps you to detach from what your mind is attaching to and suffering with. Mental states are not self. They're not me, mine, myself. They're phenomena that arise according to causes and conditions and pass away. And when we're mindful, we can know that. And so immediately, as soon as you establish mindfulness, the mind starts to relax, detach from whatever it's clinging to, and it will feel better. And this is why it's so useful to practice meditation regularly, because you always have something you can do when you're suffering. This is turning to the Dhamma, turning to the truth, but in your own experience. Literally just taking a few moments to establish mindfulness with the breathing can help you let go of worries, anger, greed and desire of one kind or another. And what it's doing is channeling the mind's energy into one place, and it's bringing it more under your control. And we need to do that. We need to train this mind, because half the time it's not under our control. It goes here and it goes there according to its moods. It just follows along. It has desires and clings to the desires. These form attachment, and that absorbs all our energy, mental energy, and we become stuck in different attachments. We attach to the body and the feelings and our views and our opinions and all the thought streams, trains of thought that come up from that. And it takes all our energy and exhausts us, drains us. So when your mind is going in the other direction, against the stream of that, it's going in the stream of the Dhamma, the path, bringing up mindfulness, wise reflection, maybe reflecting on the lack of self in experience and seeing that, however briefly, this releases energy. You feel better immediately. You've been stuck in a way of thinking, and then, this is not self, this is not me, this is not a self, this is just a train of thought that is arising from its own set of causes and conditions. It's there and then it passes away. That's liberating the mind from suffering. And the whole Buddhist teachings are based around this principle. Because all Dhammas are anatta, they're not self, well, we can affect change to the way we experience the world, to our experience of happiness and suffering. Suffering can be abandoned because it's not self. It's something that arises according to causes and conditions. Happiness, peace can be cultivated because it arises through causes and conditions. It's still not self, but we can use skillful causes and conditions to experience more clarity, more understanding, and gain more peace, more happiness from that. When we begin practice, usually we're experiencing and learning a lot about karma, which again is putting the teaching of not self into practice. Karma is teaching us, it's a teaching to see that all our intentional or volitional actions have results, have consequences. Good intention, good results. Bad intention, bad results. But there's no ultimate force, some grand spiritual force controlling that. There's no one we can blame but ourselves, our own lack of mindfulness for making karma. So in the beginning we particularly focus on bad karma because that hurts more. And when you're in pain, physical or mental pain, you tend to look around to blame somebody, but really it's the only person you can pin it on is yourself. There is no self, of course, but on this level, when you're just dealing with painful causes and conditions that you're getting caught into, unskillful karma that you're making, well, you need to use the idea of a self, the concept of self, to train. It's just a convenient way of doing it. But you have to come back and look at yourself. If you're suffering because you've said or done something that hurt somebody else or hurt yourself even, you're the one who did that. You're the one who has to clear that up, take responsibility for it. But we can change. A lot of our karma is just habitual karma. We form over time deep channels, pathways, ditches, ruts. We say we get caught into ruts of behavior. So it could be unskillful behavior, habits that we've just built up maybe from a whole lifetime or at least many years of behavior. So speech habits, negative speech habits, negative ways of behavior, destructive ways of behavior, sometimes self-destructive, sometimes harmful to others as well. Out of habit. And these, if unaddressed, well, they do form these deep channels in our mental karma and then expressed through speech and action. Sometimes living in the monastery, because we live on a mountain, and especially at this time of year when it rains, you think about this because you see the rain coming down the hill. It's always forming these ruts, channels in the earth. And if you don't direct it, one of the things you have to do if you live in the mountains is you have to make drainage channels, drainage ditches to direct water away from where you don't want it to go. Otherwise it can damage your buildings or your pathways or your roads. You have all these ditches and pipes everywhere. It can be quite time-consuming to do it, but you've got no choice because it rains heavily and the rain gathers momentum coming down the hill and it can be quite destructive. Just like our karma. If you don't do anything about it, we can cause ourselves all kinds of suffering over and over again by repeated kinds of negative behavior. I remember many years ago, maybe 25 years ago, when I used to live with Ajahn Kalyano in Wat Marpchan. That was also on a mountain. We had the same problem with torrential rain causing erosion and problems washing things away. And there was one year around this time, it was September, and it rained for 7 days and 7 nights. Terrible torrential rain, a lot of rain damage, the roads were washed out, all kinds of problems. I remember we got a call from another monastery on another mountain further along the coast. It's a monastery where another meditation teacher called Lumpur Chai lived. Lumpur Chai was quite old by then. He was in his 70s. He was somebody who had great faith in Ajahn Chah. He wasn't a direct disciple of Ajahn Chah, but he was had a great faith in Ajahn Chah, but he lived on a mountain monastery in Chonburi, and his monastery had been affected by the 7 days and 7 nights of continuous rain. And what had happened on their monastery, they had a really steep part of the mountain above the monastery. The rain had just been coming down over and over again for so long, so many days, that little streams had turned into huge rivers and torrents of water. And these torrents of water just kept coming down the mountain, getting bigger and stronger, more destructive, and they were gradually rolling whole boulders, big boulders the size of a car, were rolling down with the water, and then huge trees were crashing down and then being washed down. And they basically got half the mountainside just washed away. It's a huge scar about 50 meters wide, just through the power of water coming down in a large amount, taking everything before it, just leaving bare clay, bare earth. And it had come through the monastery, and many of the kutis, meditation huts that monks and nuns lived in, were washed away. The wooden ones were completely destroyed, some of them. And one monk, we knew it was in the middle of the night that the worst of the water came, and he was in this kuti about midnight, and this huge torrent was just coming down. He could feel the very foundations of his hut being eroded, because it was a hut built on concrete with brick walls. It wasn't a wooden hut. So he thought it was quite solid. So he was meditating, because the rain was so intense. He thought he'd just quietly meditate, be mindful of what's going on. And gradually the whole concrete slab of his meditation hut was lifted up by the power of water and deposited about 10 meters downstream. So he said it was as if a giant had come along and just picked up his hut, picked it up and thrown it 10 meters down. And it ended up on its side at a 45-degree angle. And he was still in it. So we went to visit, because the day after that, Lumpur Chai died. He passed away. So everyone thought the heavy rain was a kind of a forewarning of what was to come. The great teacher was to die. And he did die. So we went to pay respects to him, and then we visited that monk who had been in his hut, and he described the experience, very amazing experience, just the power of water coming together and washing buildings away. I always remember that, because it's like just a reminder of the power of our mind. The mental energy can be directed to very good things when we train it with mindfulness and wisdom, or it can be directed to very destructive, negative things, and we can cause ourselves all kinds of suffering, and other people are suffering when we get caught into more negative thoughts. There's still a mental energy there. It's the energy of karma, and it reaps its results. It causes this destruction in our own mind, because every negative mental state will have an unpleasant feeling, and it will cause mental agitation, disturbance, confusion, give you bad memories, give you bad dreams, give you all kinds of negative mental proliferation. And it will tend to come out, the stronger it is, well, the more likely it's to burst out in our speech and our actions. And this is why sometimes, the habits we've accumulated and haven't been very aware of or mindful of will come out in the way we relate to other people, our actions, what we're doing. Sometimes it can be just when we're totally on our own, we just have addictions. We get addicted to things that come from our greed and our desire that maybe are not very healthy for us, not very good for us, but through this powerful energy of habit and reinforced habit over and over again, they seem unstoppable. But because they're still not self, sabbe dhamma anatta, these habits and mental states and intentions and karma that we make are not self, there's always the chance to redirect this energy. Sometimes it's hard work, just like trying to redirect water that's coming down a mountainside. You might have to do a lot of work to do that. But it can be done because they're not self. It's not like you're born that way and will always be that way. The whole purpose of the Buddhist practice is you're practicing to change for the better, and you're learning from experience. But it requires sometimes a lot of effort, patient mindfulness, and the application of wisdom and wise reflection to affect these changes. But the more you look at your own experience and reflect on it, well, you get your motivation to see where things are going wrong and where suffering is coming from. But you do have to invest that time in looking, observing yourself to understand. And this is why the power of mindfulness helps. And you see, again, going back to water, when water is moving, it tends to hold silt and dirt, and it's got ripples and waves in it. So when it's moving, it's very hard to see anything through the water, what's underneath it. And our mind is like that. When we have a lot of negative energy, the mind is just full of mental turbulence, thoughts, whether it's worries, fears, anger, greed, they stir up the mind. When you practice mindfulness, you're stilling the mind. So it's like getting that water and just putting it into a vessel or making a dam, a wall, and the water starts to slow down or settle, and the things in the water settle. Then you can see through the water very well, and you can see your reflection in it. Still water will reflect whatever is above it, and it can be as clear as a mirror. Our mind is like that. When we still it with the power of mindfulness, even if the world around us is still turbulent, in a turmoil and chaos, the mind, if it's still, can see everything with much more clarity. And then this teaching that all things are not self, their causes and conditions, starts to become apparent. We can see mental states arising through their causes. And when we bring up fresh good causes, mindfulness, insight, we can let them go again. And it may be as simple as reminding yourself, well, this is not self, this is just a thought, this is just a feeling, it's just a mood. As we practice mindfulness, then particularly the states of calm start to arise. We experience peace in the citta. The citta is what gains from the practice of mindfulness, and states of samadhi can arise, states of stillness, quiet, peace, calm. And there's this effect of balancing the emotions. Where the more mindfulness we practice, the more we have the ability to let go of the more disturbing negative emotions that lead to harmful speech, harmful actions. And the more positive, calming kinds of emotions are developed. So as we develop states of samadhi, then we have the experience of more empathy, more kindness, friendliness, the brightness, the energetic, the energy of the mind is released, and the emotions start to balance. And from there you get a very good platform, a steady, still platform for which to investigate on a more refined level this teaching of anatta, not self. When your mind is more still, the emotions are more calm, you have a sense of well-being, then you can look at things as they are and accept whatever conclusions you're drawing from what you see. In the beginning of our practice of meditation, often we recoil from what we see in our mind, because often it's not always that good. We have ideals about who we would like to be, and even in meditation and practicing Buddhism, we bring in our ideals and attachments. I want to be a good person, a good Buddhist, or I want to attain samadhi, I don't want to have any anger, I want to have a mind that is free from anger, I want to attain the path, the fruit, nibbana, I want to be an arahant. Even practicing the Dhamma, we have a lot of wanting and desire come into our experience. And some of that doesn't look very nice. When you see these desires, the wants, the attachments, we shrink away from them, and we're not so happy with ourselves seeing all this stuff, even though it's the very stuff we have to learn from. So the sense of calm, sense of well-being, sense of peace we gain from practicing mindfulness and developing our meditation gives you this platform to really look at the mind in a detached way, to develop this sense of detached, peaceful awareness where you can admit even if you're having a very ugly, unpleasant thought, you can admit it to yourself, you can see it, recognize it for what it is, take responsibility for what it is, rather than running away from it or distracting yourself from it. You notice when samadhi is not well established, the mind jumps away from anything it doesn't like. So a lot of our negative thoughts are, they're just not pleasant, not nice to be with. So when you're bored, when you're bored, your mind is just moving from one thing to another. It's restless, it's bored, it's not satisfied with anything. If you don't develop mindfulness at that time, then the whole thing would just continue and your mind would just jump from this to that to the other, and you'll be attached to being bored. Whereas it's quite possible to make boredom the object of your meditation. If that's what's coming up, don't run away from it, just establish mindfulness of being bored. Oh, it's like this, and what is it? Investigate it. You'll find the more you train yourself to do this, you can see boredom, it's a mixture of certain feeling. Maybe it's partly coming from feelings of tiredness, weariness in the body. Partly it's through the mind is not content in itself, so it's just jumping around looking for the next thing to latch onto. But if you start investigating that, you can see it's just another mood of the mind, another thought. I don't have to believe it or follow it, I can just observe it. And maybe you find it passes away quite quickly once you actually make it the object of your mindfulness. You could even say, ironically, that boredom becomes interesting when you make it the object of your mindfulness. It disappears because it's not self. It's not really you or a person, a being, a self. It's just a state of mind. The other big obstacle when you're doing this practice is also doubt. Same sort of thing. You have doubt arise. Am I meditating properly? Should I be mindful of the breath, or should I contemplate? What did the Buddha want me to do now? What should I do now with how I'm feeling? Is it right? Is it wrong? Doubt is another huge obstacle, especially in the beginning of the practice. And like boredom, often all you can do is establish mindfulness on the doubt and say, doubt. Catch it before it leads you off into another train of thought, leads you to stop meditating, leads you to give up. Get smart at recognizing doubt when it arises and see the damage it does when you fall into it, when you believe it and fall into it. Reflect maybe on previous times when you have followed doubt. What does it do as a consequence of coming under the influence of doubt? Well, it tends to mean you just try this and that doesn't work, so you try that. You go here, you go there, you try this technique or that technique, this way of thinking and looking at things, and then try that, and you go around in circles and your mind doesn't settle down. As soon as you face up to doubt, recognize it, this is doubt, then you've got an opportunity to learn from it and transcend it. So practicing mindfulness in meditation, a lot of the time you're facing up to things you don't really want to look at. You don't want them to be there because they're obstacles, they're hindrances, they're ugly ways of thinking. And you'd rather distract yourself from them, run away from them. But with mindfulness and some wise attention, you're developing that strength of mind, the ability to know yourself at one moment. And ultimately to know that what we call yourself or myself is not a self. But before you can know that yourself is not a self, you have to know yourself. We're sort of jumping between these two levels of experience in meditation. On the beginning, you're developing mindfulness, you're sitting down to meditate, I'm going to meditate. So there's a self that is meditating, the conventional self, the assumed reality. I am a person, I have to train this mind to give up the attachments that are causing me suffering. And that's a convenient way to think about it and talk about it. But as the mindfulness develops and that sense of detached awareness improves, well, that sense of self starts to dissipate because you're pulling back from what you formerly were attaching to as self. As Ajahn Chah used to like to say, the sense of self is like a screw that you've tightened, a screw that holds two pieces of wood together or two pieces of metal together. You screw the screw down into the hole with a screwdriver and tighten it up to make sure those two things don't come apart. Over our life, these habits that we built up unmindfully, the worst of the consequences of all our unmindful behavior over our lifetime is that we've screwed this screw down. This sense of self has become really deeply ingrained, automatically attached to our feelings, thoughts, the body as a self. And that way of viewing things is just ingrained in us, like this screw. It's just tight. Every time you establish mindfulness, you're untightening the screw a little bit. And especially if it's rusty, the worst kinds of selves, the most coarsest kinds of this self, our angry self, our greedy self, is like, the screw has gone rusty and it's just stuck there. So you have to work hard to unwind it, to unscrew the screw. And that's why meditation can seem hard work. You're little by little grabbing the screw and turning it back and back and back. But the result is you feel this sense of releasing the tightness of attaching to an idea of a self. And you're experiencing things more as phenomena, as Dhamma. We say as Dhamma, sabbe Dhamma anatta. Physical phenomena, mental phenomena are just phenomena. No one owns them. There's no being in there. And the more clarity you gain, the more you're untightening that screw. So the sense of release arises. So you'll tend to experience it first with just the sense of dropping all your normal attachments in meditation and experiencing some peace. When your mind settles on the breath, you feel quite peaceful, happy. You've let go of the distracted mind, the mind that wants things, desires things, at least temporarily. Even pain in your body, you might have let go of that, and your mind has just put everything to one side. So the sense of self, the idea of a self, has disappeared. It's a relief. You feel very happy, very content. But it's not enough. You also have to go on and investigate. You use that feeling of contentment to investigate your experience further, develop insight further, and particularly maybe the very sense of self that forms around the experience of samadhi and bliss. You like it, it's desirable. And people will warn you, don't practice samadhi, you'll get attached to the bliss. But in order to let go of it, you might have to experience it first, because it's a useful step on the path. You need to settle the mind, develop that stillness so you can see things clearly, even though the stillness itself you can attach to, but you keep reflecting on it and observing where the sense of self forms. And it might be a very subtle sense of self. So, as you proceed in the practice, the turning of this screw maybe gets much lighter. Like once the screw is very close to being pulled out from its hole, well, it's very easy to turn it then. It just takes a few turns. Maybe you can put the screwdriver down and use your fingers for the last few turns. That's like the most subtle sense of self that still forms around feelings of bliss, the experience of mindfulness, the insights we have. But if you get the basics right from the beginning of your practice, that you're investigating to see what this sense of self is, what it's made up of, and see how when we attach to this view of self we suffer, you get that established, and then you apply the reflection all the way through your practice. Well, it's always there to help you, so you don't attach to the view of self for very long. Even when your mind is very peaceful, it's not going to fall into an attachment for very long, because this can happen. I can attach to this feeling of peace from samadhi. Where do you see the attachment? Or where suffering arises. So maybe when it passes, you lose the peace and you say, I want that back again. And you can, if you've had a really peaceful meditation and the sense of self has completely disappeared for a while, and you're just with the state of awareness, the mind is bright, clear, luminous, then that fades and the more coarser mind states return, and you've got back to a bit of mental proliferation, some greed, some anger. Oh, we can get very upset by that. Oh, what happened to my samadhi? I want that back again. And if you can blame it on someone, you want to blame that person. You want to tell them, oh, you've disturbed my samadhi. So even innocent animals can get it. So monks can be in the forest and birds come along making too much noise, takes them out of their samadhi, and they're sitting there throwing their fist up at the birds. You terrible birds, you've ruined my samadhi. Or if it's a person, that person who's talking too much, we blame them. So we have to keep contemplating, even after we've developed some calm, some stillness. It's not the end of the story. It's a very useful step on the path, but then we have to contemplate, where is this attachment forming, and bring up the reflection. The anatta sanya, this is not self. The samadhi arises through causes and conditions. When the causes and conditions change, well, the samadhi might disappear, fade. But there's something that can know that, and that's wisdom. And that's the reflection of these things are causes and conditions. They're not a self, they're not me, they're not who I am. I don't own this. At every stage of our practice, we can use this reflection. This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. In the beginning, we might just recite it as a mantra. Another ugly thought comes into your mind, oh, this is not me, this is not myself. It can helps you to let go. Your aim is to completely let go. You're not just finding excuses to carry on holding on to those thoughts, but it can be a valid reflection when you're getting caught into a mood. Oh, this is not self, that's what the Buddha taught me. Helps you to let go of some anger rather than acting on it and saying or doing something that you will regret later. This is not self, just let it be. If it's not a self, I don't have to get involved with it. So you're developing the perception of anatta, of not self, and that means the perception of not getting hold of things, not taking hold of things, not getting involved with things. These things are just the affairs of the world. Like Ajahn Chah used to say, if you develop this insight to its perfection, then the mind separates from the world. It's still in the world, but it separates because it's not taking the world as self anymore. Thoughts, feelings, body, physical sensations, pain, pleasure and pain are not being taken as self anymore. But it's not, you're not in the world, but the mind is no longer grasping at these experiences with a sense of self. So he used to use the simile of like oil and water in a bottle. The oil and the water are both in the same bottle, but they're separate. In the mind that's seen not self is like that, it's separate, it separates from experience. It knows the experience as impermanent, as suffering, and it's not self, so the mind doesn't want to grasp at experience. Sometimes he would say, the kilesas, greed, anger, delusion that cause all this attachment and suffering, they're still there, it's just your mind doesn't grasp at them anymore. They're still there, ready to cause trouble for whoever's unmindful enough to walk into them and take hold of them. But if you know, you don't grasp at them as self anymore, so you don't have any more suffering, any more trouble. It's a bit like when you go to visit the monasteries in England. A few months ago I was in England visiting my dad before he died, and I stayed in Chithurst Monastery at Ajahn Kalyano's kuti, and his kuti has a beautiful kuti in a nice English forest, but English forests have nettles around. I'm lucky, I'm English, so when I see nettles I don't walk into the nettles because they sting and you get hurt. So I can walk meditation and walk through the forest. I see nettles, it's like, oh, no need to walk there, you'll get hurt. But some people come from overseas, they don't know, and they go, oh, what are those? They walk straight in and they get hurt. The arahant is like someone who sees nettles everywhere. They don't want to get attached to any of it because they know it will hurt. They're that smart. We're not that smart yet, so we keep getting caught into the nettles of the mind. Everywhere in the world is the same. It's like when I first went to Abhayagiri monastery, they have poison oak there, and I never knew about poison oak, and I came from Thailand, so I had just wearing my flip-flops on my feet, bare feet. I had a Thai angsa with a bare shoulder, and I went for a walk in the forest, came back, and now I know all about poison oak. You get burning rashes. Arahants are like that. They say, Ajahn Chah used to say, the kilesas, the bad things in the world are there, but your mind doesn't want them anymore. Doesn't run after desire, doesn't fall into attachment because it knows it hurts. The advantage of the practice is you can keep developing this insight over and over again till it really sticks, because insight sticks. It doesn't fade. Once true insight is established, true wisdom is established, that's what stays, that's what's left in the mind. Even samadhi fades, it comes and goes. Sila can fade, come and go, but once insight is established, it doesn't fade, and then the sila and the samadhi doesn't fade. So all the path that we've developed no longer fades. So it's like you've got what you are aiming for. And one of the problems with our practice is that it fades. We get good experiences and then we lose them. We keep the precepts and then we break our precepts. We develop meditation, develop states of calm, and then we lose them. But if you keep practicing, the insights develop some depth to them, and gradually they start to change the mind for the better. Because true insight doesn't leave you. And with insight one gets release, vimutti, release, and with release one gets piti and sukha, a peaceful mind. So with insight one gets the deepest kind of peace, deepest kind of release. And that doesn't fall back. And that's the aim of the practice. Getting the mind to the point where it doesn't fall back to making more bad karma, creating this sense of self that goes around attaching to things and suffering all over the place. It stops doing that. Little by little it stops. In Thailand they have this way of making Buddha statues, like the Buddha statue behind me, and in most temples you see that when the Buddha statue is made from bronze, it actually starts life as a waxworks statue, usually made from beeswax, dark red beeswax. They get a huge amount of it because they make a life-size model of whichever Buddha statue they're going to make. There'll be an artist who's skilled, he gets all the wax and he starts moulding it into the shape of the Buddha, sitting Buddha, standing Buddha. And he'll work at it for many days, sculpting, pressing bits of wax in, removing bits of wax, shaping it, cutting it, styling it. And whoever's sponsoring the Buddha statue will come along and tell the artist how they want it. That's not right, do this, do that, until they get the statue they want in wax. And then they have a process they call the lost wax method of making a bronze statue, where they cover the wax in plaster and they heat the plaster up and drain away the wax, and it leaves an impression on the plaster, and then that's replaced with bronze, liquid bronze, and you get your bronze statue. But they use this as a simile or metaphor for the mind that's practicing with the path. You start off with the rough wax, unshaped wax, doesn't look like anything yet, and you gradually mould it and shape it, and you can keep shaping it as long as it's wax, because that's the purpose of wax. It's malleable, workable. Our mind is like that. If we keep training it, developing the good karma, we're developing these new good habits of practicing living in a harmless way, developing virtue, developing mindfulness, developing all the skillful qualities that come with the path. It's gradually reshaping, remoulding our mind, and that's also an expression of not self. Because if everything was fixed, like the finished Buddha statue is fixed, it's metal, you can't change that now. You can polish it a little bit, but you can't really change it. If everything was fixed like that from day one, we couldn't practice, could we? We couldn't change for the better. But our practice really is working with the malleable mind, the wax mind, until it's shaped, and then you can leave it. That's when insight is established. We know things are not self. We know that where we attach to self, we suffer, so we let go. Once you let go, then it's like you've got the full Buddha statue, the completed statue. But up to that point, you're still working with the wax, the beeswax. You're molding yourself. But because it's not self, you can. You can develop the causes and conditions, this path, and change yourself as a human being for the better, and develop clarity, insight, and remove all the causes of suffering from the mind. But like the artist, you have to keep going. You have to keep molding that beeswax until the job is done. If you give up, well, it's just like it's stuck. The face is not right, the arms are not right. If you leave it there, well, it remains at that level. Or maybe, if you neglect it, maybe the sun comes out or someone comes along and melts it down, it's all gone, it's all lost. Our mind is like that. It can develop to the highest level of insight, or we can neglect it, be heedless, be careless, and it can flow downhill like the water, it just flows away, and it's not used for anything good. We are the ones who have to take hold of this mind and train it, and be willing to train it patiently, mindfully, and develop the insight. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and wish you all well at this time in lockdown. May you have lots of patience and mindfulness and loving kindness and friendliness for each other. And I hope that the Buddhist teachings can bring you some happiness, and that you can develop more insight into sabbe Dhamma anatta, all phenomena are without self, because that's what will liberate you from suffering.